This Ice Shards Sorcerer build is the fastest leveling build for the Sorcerer by far and does so much damage early game. You can wipe out groups of enemies with one click of a button, and this build is incredibly powerful and will level you up in absolutely no time. Let's get right into the skill tree and I'll show you exactly the skills you need for this build and the entire setup from start to finish so you can go from 1 to 50 in a matter of hours. Before I go over the skills, look in the description and pinned comment. There's a build planner there. You can follow along exactly with the build, and it has exactly what skills to level up all the way from levels 1 to level 50 in the entire build setup. So I highly recommend pulling that up as I go through these. So the skill tree, first we're going to start off with our basic skill. It's going to be Arc Lash. We're going to go into Enhanced Arc Lash and Flickering Arc Lash. This is going to be our primary basic skill that's going to allow us to generate Fury early on and be our primary attack up until about level 30 or so. And this is going to let us generate our Fury very consistently for our later abilities. Now next we're going to go down here to core skills, and as you already know, our primary core skill is going to be Ice Shards. We're then going to go into Enhanced Ice Shards and Greater Ice Shards. And Ice Shards, if you've never played Sorcerer before, is very good because it lets you launch multiple Ice Shards that deal a decent amount of damage each, and overall the skill deals 25% increased damage to enemies that are frozen. And the way this build works is we're going to set up so all the enemies we fight are going to be frozen, meaning we're going to deal increased damage almost all of the time. With the modifiers on it, Ice Shards have a 40% chance to ricochet to other enemies, meaning when we shoot this and it ricochets off another enemy, it's going to hit an additional enemy. And if you can imagine us casting multiple Ice Shards at enemies at all times, we're going to get a ton of ricochet, a ton of extra damage all the way around. And if an enemy's frozen, which they will be most of the time, it will always ricochet, meaning we're going to get a ton of projectile damage on every single person around. And while you have a barrier active, casts of Ice Shards always treat enemies as if they were frozen, and we're going to set this build up so we'll always have a barrier, or enemies will always be frozen, meaning they're always going to take a ton of increased damage, leading to a lot of one-shots. And we're also going to take 1 point and Fireball for a little later. Again, if you follow that build planner, it's going to explain exactly how that works. And this is just an enchantment that we're going to use to deal explosive damage. You can see the enchantment effect at the bottom. When you kill an enemy, they explode on a fireball for 50% of its damage. This, combined with another ability I'll show you in a minute, will allow you to sometimes not even cast any ability, just allow you to cast one single skill, and it will just destroy everyone all around you all at once. It will one-shot kill every single thing with the click of a button. It's so OP. But we're also going to take Enhanced Fireball, which means our fireball's radius is increased based on the distance traveled. Next, we're going to want to come down here and take Flame Shield. Flame Shield is our defensive ability, and it makes it so that you engulf yourself in flames for 2 seconds and you burn surrounding enemies for a certain amount of damage. Additionally, you get 25% movement speed while it's active, and you heal for 50% of your missing life, and it allows us to stay alive a little bit longer when we're taking a lot of damage and gives us a lot of defensive ability, especially early on. And then you want to go into Enhanced Flame Shield and Shimmering Flame Shield. This is going to be an important defensive ability for levels 1 through 50. And then we're going to take a Teleport, again also an important ability. It's going to allow us to teleport out of the way and give us movability so we can move around the map and we can get out of situations where we may die. Additionally, this is going to make us become unstoppable, so if we get frozen or anything like that, it's going to remove all those effects to keep us from getting basically permanently stun locked. Very important to have. Go into Enhanced Teleport and Shimmering Teleport as well for the additional damage reduction. And then we're going to go into Ice Armor. This is going to be one of our absolute key abilities you have to have. And that's because Ice Armor is going to give us a barrier, which will play into a lot of our aspects and abilities overall, because we get a lot of bonuses when we have a barrier active. So this is going to give us a barrier for 6 seconds and absorb a certain amount of your life and damage. And while it's active, 5% of your damage dealt is added to the barrier. So we only have actually 1 point here. So only put 1 point and then go into Enhanced Ice Armor. Next, we're going to go into our second most important skill, which is Frost Nova. Frost Nova essentially freezes enemy around you for 3.15 seconds, and it makes it so that every enemy is vulnerable and every enemy takes that additional damage from being frozen. And while killing enemies frozen by Frost Nova, this is going to reduce our cooldowns by 1 second, up to 4 seconds per cast. And again, it makes enemies vulnerable for 4 seconds. And because of this, we do increased damage to vulnerable enemies, and we do that extra increased damage because they're frozen as well, giving us a lot of one-shot kills on a lot of enemies in this game. We're going to go into Enhanced Frost Nova and Mystical Frost Nova as well. We're then going to take 3 out of 3 points in Glass Cannon, meaning we deal 18% increased damage, but take 9% more damage, and then 1 out of 3 in Elemental Attunement. So that way, on lucky hit, critical strikes have up to a 5% chance to reduce the cooldown of your defensive abilities. And this can only happen once every 10 seconds, but it gives us a very easy way to basically reset our defensive skills every once in a while very quickly. We're going to go for Precision Magic. This passive increases your lucky hit chance by 15%, which is big for this build. Then we're going to grab Align the Elements. That means you gain 1% damage reduction as a path to taking mana shield, meaning every time you spend 100 mana, you gain 15% damage reduction for 5 seconds, giving us an almost always uptime of 15% damage reduction, increasing our survivability by quite a lot. And then taking protection, meaning using a cooldown grants 30% of your maximum life as a barrier. And that's it for conjuration skills. Next, we're going to go down here to mastery skills. We're going to make sure to take Icy Veil here. Means your barriers have a 5% increased duration. So again, our barrier is going to last longer, which is a primary part of this build. And while you have a barrier active, you apply 16% more chill. And more chill is basically going to reduce enemy movement. And while enemies are chilled and get repeatedly chilled, they're going to be frozen, again, taking even more damage than before. And then we're going to come down here to our ultimate skills. And again, all we're going to do is take all of these passives. Permafrost, which gives 15% increased damage to elites, 12% increased damage to vulnerable enemies for Icy Touch. Frigid Breeze means cold damage against vulnerable enemies has a 20% chance to give us mana, so we're going to have decent mana regeneration from this. And Hoarfrost, where we deal 9% increased damage to chilled enemies and 18% to frozen enemies. And then Avalanche as our key passive, which is going to make sure your frost skills on Lucky Hit have a 10% chance to make your next cast of Ice Shards, in this case, or Blizzard, consume no mana and deal 40% increased damage. And that chance is doubled against vulnerable enemies. Now, once you get into about the level 30s, one thing you should consider, and I'll include this in the actual build planner below, is you're going to want to get rid of Flickering Arc Lash at some point, and then you're going to want to come down here and put points into Blizzard, and then Enhanced Blizzard, and then Wizard's Blizzard. And this is going to essentially make it so that we're replacing Arc Lash, and we're going to summon a Frigid Blizzard that deals a certain amount of damage and chills enemies. And with this actual passive, this Cold Front passive, we're going to give enemies more chill. The way this works, and I'll go over this in the DPS rotation, is when our Frost Nova cooldown, which is our primary freezing ability for extra damage, is on cooldown, we're going to be able to use Blizzard, apply a certain amount of chill to enemies very quickly, and this is going to hopefully freeze enemies so we can do chilled and freeze damage on them. So when Frost Nova is down, this is our secondary chill ability. And I'll go over this final skill tree with Arc Lash replaced. And so you can see just the skills really quick here. Again, all of these skills are going to be in the build planner below in the description and the comments. So make sure to check that out so you can just follow along very easily. Now let's quickly go over the enchantments. So once you reach level 15 or so, you're going to be able to unlock your enchantment slots via a main quest for your sorcerer. Once you unlock these, you're going to essentially put the Ice Shards enchantment here. This enchantment is so important because, again, we get those ricocheted Ice Shards to other enemies, giving us a ton of damage in an entire group, setting off basically a chain reaction. And then Fireball enchantment single-handedly sometimes lets us cast Frost Nova and not even have to attack enemies and kill an entire group, because when you kill an enemy, they explode in a fireball for 50% of its damage. Next, we're going to go over the gear very quickly, and overall it doesn't matter completely. The first thing you absolutely need is this aspect for Prodigies, which makes using a cooldown restore 15 mana, meaning every time we use a cooldown, we're going to get mana from it, and this is going to greatly increase our mana capacity and mana regeneration to allow us to keep up a lot of our skills and spellcasting. This is a must-have for early game, and you can actually get this from the appropriate dungeon. Our second thing, again, we're putting on a ring because early game we don't replace a lot of this stuff, so that's what we're putting on our rings and amulets. Our second aspect is going to be aspect of the Piercing Cold, which makes Ice Shards pierce 3 to 4 times, dealing 25% less damage per subsequent hit. And we get a lot more piercing with Ice Shards this way, increasing our overall damage output and AoE to other enemies. So this is a very needed one as well. And the one on our amulet is also extremely important once you can get it. And again, you can get this from a dungeon. You deal 38% more damage to immobilized, stunned, or frozen enemies. And our enemies are always frozen with this build almost all of the time, giving us an insane damage bonus for those frozen enemies. So this is a big one to have. So even if you just get it and get the minimum roll, or just do it from the Codex of Power, make sure you have this on your build at all times because it's absolutely needed for extra damage. And then on our weapon here, you deal 22% increased damage to vulnerable enemies while you have a barrier activated. And enemies are almost always going to meet these two criteria where they're vulnerable and we have a barrier ourselves, giving us an extra 22% damage increase, which again increases our damage quite a lot. Now I'm going to go over the gear really quickly, and even though my gear doesn't match this, I'm going to show you exactly kind of the stat lines you want to match for your gear. It's going to make all of this so much easier for you, especially once you hit 50 towards the end game. So our helmet is going to want cooldown reduction. Anything else you have is fine. Total armor, maximum mana is a good thing. So maximum mana and cooldown reduction is going to be ideal for the helmet. The armor is going to be armor percentage overall and damage, so some type of damage buffer overall, just like plus 10% damage. Gloves, the main thing you want is Ice Shards rank. So ranks to Ice Shards, it's going to give you extra damage for your obviously primary ability. That's a big one. Anything else is just bonus. Our pants, now I found the Ice Heart Bryce unique pants, but you don't need these. Primarily focus on getting intelligence on your pants and armor percentage, or even freeze duration. Those three things are going to be very cool to have. And then boots. Now the three main things you want here, if you can get all three, it's perfect. The first one is going to be movement speed. The sorcerer runs so slow, so having movement speed is the top thing here. If you don't have movement speed and you have to give every other option up on your boots, give it up. Have movement speed. That is the main priority. Secondly is mana cost reduction. You can see I do actually have that on my boots. Mana cost reduction is going to be big for casting our spells and mana regen. And then our third would be Frost Nova ranks. If you can get these, again, it just helps with our freeze and freeze damage, etc. So for our amulet, our best things are going to be cooldown reduction, mana reduction, and again, movement speed to increase our speed with the sorcerer. And then for our rings, you can use these stats for all of them. Close damage, vulnerable damage, and damage versus crowd controlled. And even crit strike damage is great for this. Or even other things like damage to chilled enemies or maximum mana if that's all you can get. And overall, the way the DPS rotation works is essentially we walk into an area of enemies. You can then cast Ice Armor to give us a barrier, so that way we then get the bonuses for having a barrier activated. You can then cast Frost Nova, which is going to freeze every enemy around us. You can choose whether or not you want to cast Ice Armor or not based on the scenario, because most of the time you don't need it to kill the group of enemies around you. But then you're going to cast Frost Nova. This is going to freeze enemies all around you immediately, and then you're just going to start spamming them with Ice Shards, and this is going to deal an insane amount of damage and almost wipe them out completely. You can also use Flame Shield as a defensive ability. You can use Teleport to grant you Unstoppable to get rid of effects and get out of dodge. These are both kind of defensive abilities. And then when our Frost Nova is on cooldown, if you run into another group of enemies, instead of casting Frost Nova, because again it's on cooldown and you're waiting for it, you can cast Blizzard instead. And then once you cast Blizzard instead, it's going to again apply that chilling to enemies and hopefully make them frozen, so that way you deal extra damage against them. And you can do the same thing as Frost Nova at that point, cast Blizzard and then spam them with Ice Shards for the most damage. And then once Frost Nova comes up, just repeat and jump back and forth between these. But if Frost Nova's up, always use it because you get the most damage this way. And you can see here, normally what we would do is we have the option to cast Ice Armor to get Barrier, Frost Nova, and then use Ice Shards, and it bounces between all the frozen enemies and basically wipes them out instantaneously, which is why this is such an OP build. And then while our Frost Nova is down, we can cast Blizzard, and what Blizzard's going to do is kind of a similar thing. It's going to chill enemies so that way they take additional damage, and then we're going to be able to cast our Ice Shards. And then again, we can cast Ice Armor, Frost Nova once it's up, and then just continue to spam Ice Shards this way. And it makes this the most OP build because again, once an enemy explodes, it destroys all the enemies around them because of the Fireball enchantment. This is the best leveling build for the Sorcerer by far. And again, that link down in the description and in the comment section is for the build planner. So feel free to click on that and save it to reference it. If you guys liked the video, make sure to drop a like and subscribe to the channel if you're new. I do these kind of videos all the time. And check out this video on the left or the right for some awesome Diablo 4 content. Thanks.